forget smart. We need context cities.
Thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica podcast. I am Mustafa Sharif, an urban planner, and you're more than welcome to join my big journey of exploring the making of smarter and more livable cities. Please don't forget to follow Urbanistica on the different social media platforms, and also let's connect on LinkedIn. Big thanks to Urbanistica podcast partner AFRI. AFRI is an international engineering and design company providing sustainable solutions in the fields of energy, industry, and infrastructure. Are you ready for a new episode? Let's go for it.
Today we have a great guest and a very interesting episode, because this episode is a collaboration between the Urbanistica podcast and the Center for Future of Places. So I have the pleasure to welcome you, Chuck Wolfe, to Urbanistica podcast. Hey, and welcome, Chuck.
Oh, thank you, Mustafa. I've listened to you somewhat regularly, more regularly than you know, because I'm lonely for Stockholm. COVID kept me from my big month in Stockholm in March and April of, I guess now last year, when I was supposed to be there finishing my book, and instead I finished it here at home.
Yeah. How are you doing? And by the way, where are you now?
Now it's always a complicated question with me, but I now live in Newbury in Berkshire in England in the United Kingdom, and we've lived in the United Kingdom for 3 years. Obviously, for those who don't know me, my accent betrays me, and I'm American, but I'm in Newbury in England right now.
Yeah. So I'm happy that you give your valuable time to record this episode. So thank you so much.
Oh, no, my pleasure, truly.
So let's start with you. You're our storyteller, and I would love to know more about you. How would you like to introduce yourself and tell us what are you passionate about?
Well, always a complex question as well, but I'm really passionate about understanding cities in perhaps a more complex way than we often find available to us in some aspects of social media or amid some very popular movements these days. It's not that I'm not intensely supportive of those movements, but I'm someone who champions a deeper dive, a more immersive approach to understanding our cities. And I think that's for 2 or 3 reasons. One, I'm the son of an urban planning professor in the United States who was reasonably well known as one of the founders of the field of urban design back in the day. His name is Meyer Wolfe, and he didn't write or publish as much as some other names that we all know, such as Kevin Lynch and whatnot. But he was very much in those circles and very friendly with a lot of the everyday names. So I obviously learned by osmosis, and a lot of what I bring to the table has to do with some very fortunate elements of my childhood, which involved a lot of geeky and nerdy conversations about cities, and also the opportunity to travel abroad. I grew up in Seattle and had many opportunities when I was a child to live in Europe, and learned a lot, and it kind of came back to me in later life in a shocking way. In between, I was an American environmental and land use lawyer, and I had a master's in planning and regional planning from Cornell. But then I went to law school, and I had a 34-year career as a, what here would be called perhaps a planning or entitlements lawyer. In the United States term is land use lawyer. And I approached this in an immersive way that had to do with advocacy. I like to think that a lot of projects I worked on were on the progressive side and were for people who cared about their communities. But, that may not always have been true because a lawyer's oath is to advocate his or her client's best interests. But I come at this then from both a humanistic perspective, having been the child of a planning academic who was entrenched in urban design and depicting cities in his own way, which was sketching to supplement his academia. And then also as a history major, as an undergraduate, and also, as I said, as a lawyer. And since all of that has unwound, I've continued to be passionate about this deep immersive dive into understanding cities and issues today.
So, but Chuck, tell me, like, you were a lawyer and then masters in planning. So when and why did you start doing all of this writing about cities? Like, when did it happen?
Yeah, that's all in the subconscious. but I can tell you that when I was young, as I now counsel people in their teens and 20s not to do, I was very, very, very conscious of what I should do. And that should meant, go to law school or do something, meaningful in that way. Not for the remuneration, not for the money, but to make a difference. And I'm not sorry I did that, but I think what that did was subvert, the more passionate creative side. And so with that background, what happened was about 2009, in the midst of the early mid part of the Great Recession, a lot of newspapers were failing and going digital. And in Seattle, where I was practicing law at the time, and I always taught planning law on the side at the University of Washington. So I didn't give up an academic, framework or point of view, but it was from the legal side. I had an opportunity to write for one of the Seattle daily newspapers that eliminated its print editions and went totally online and laid off most of their staff. And as was the case in those times, there was a big role for outside professionals to play in what was still being called the new media. And I was asked to write a column or a regular piece about cities and sustaining cities and regulating cities and so on and so forth. At that point, which was 2009, those types of opportunities rapidly multiplied. And before I knew it, I was writing for, another local publication in Seattle, for the digital version of the Atlantic, for later Atlantic Cities and City Lab in its early days, for the Huffington Post, for many different online media publications. And then in the midst of all that, I was reconnected through an old friend who had a senior role at Island Press, which is a niche publisher on sustainability and environment and urbanism in Washington, D.C. And I had the opportunity to write my first book in then only digital form. Then a couple of years later, I wrote my second book, which was the full meal deal. And then, maybe as we'll discuss, the first book, Urbanism Without Effort, was republished in 2019 as a legacy real book. And then the book before that was Seeing the Better City, about urban observation. And then there's a pending book that I think we're going to discuss. I can talk more about how those opportunities unfolded, but that's a long form of the quick story that I just was lucky. And what it did is it pulled me away from the law practice and gave me new opportunities, and coupled with an opportunity my wife had to work here in the United Kingdom, and it was an absolute no-brainer to come over and above the American election of 2016.
So all this journey started with writing a small piece, and then it's developed to books.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, you could say that all this journey started long ago when I used to do monkey see, monkey do with my dad, and he'd be sketching, and I'd be taking pictures on a primitive Kodak Instamatic camera, which I wrote about in Urbanism Without Effort. But yes, I wrote a piece for the Seattle Post-Intelligencer online about what happened to the development boom in Seattle, only temporarily, it turns out, because of the Great Recession. And I was writing as a lawyer. I wasn't who I am now, but you're right, that opened the door.
Well, tell us about your relationship and your story with the Center for Future of Places, because this episode is a collaboration between the Urbanistica podcast and the Center for Future of Places. So please tell us about the background.
Of course, because that's part of this, this amazing journey interrupted by COVID-19. What I think happened was before. There's a few aspects of it. One, somewhere along the line, as I became more active in American urbanism, I attended the first placemaking leadership council put on by the then Project for Public Spaces, and that was in Detroit in 2013. There I first met Peter Elmland of the Axon Johnson Foundation, who was at that time, rather than providing great support and funding of the Center for Future of Places at KTH, he was at that time working with PPS and others on a series of international conferences on the future of places. That's when I first became aware of that term. And what happened was, at that conference, and in and around that conference, I met a student at KTH who now is Dr. Ryan Locke, who's a close colleague of Tigran Haas, the center director, and he was co-director of the Masters of Urbanism program. So what I'm saying is, in 2013, there were some small introductions that led to Tigran noticing when Urbanism Without Effort came out that year, which led to a social media relationship, which led to, by 2017, when I was running around the world to some degree with Seeing the Better City, my second book, and I'd given many talks in the United States and appeared on podcasts like this, and was on my way to series of, I think, 14 speaking events in Australia. I wrote to Tigran and said, I'm going to be in Europe at such and such a time. And so Tigran invited me to be part of the first one of the several series that came out of the center. And that was the Delphi panels, the Delphi talks that have 3 or 4 people a piece. And I think we at the center did maybe 5 of them or something. And I was in the very first one, and then I actually developed and was the moderator for the third. But so I was part of the first Delphi with some very esteemed company, the American architect and urbanist Dan Solomon, Emily Talon, the professor of urbanism from University of Chicago, And Susan Silverberg, who teaches part-time at MIT and is a consultant in Boston. And that was in June of 2017. And what that led to was Tigran and I continuing to talk, and I was invited back to help teach the urban observation class that was in the Masters of Urbanism program with Brian Locke. And then immediately after that, I became a visiting scholar at the center for 2 years, and was in operating here from the United Kingdom. I was in Sweden 2 months apiece in 2018 and 19. Then now the position title has switched a bit to, I think, guest affiliate scholar or something like that. And I was, as I've said, still supposed to be there this year to finish the latest book, which is the capstone of the project I was working on at the center, which was called the Cities in Context project. And it has ended up to be this book not from Island Press, but from Roman and Littlefield, which is going to be a nice hardback book. This is a mock-up of it called Sustaining a City's Cultural Character, Principles and Best Practices. And not surprisingly, this podcast is well-timed because the book should be, I think its official release date is in the next few weeks, but I think actually the first copies will be available in the United States in the next few days. So that's how I got involved with the center. Again, it was very lucky, and but it's been very instrumental in my transition from lawyer to something else.
Yeah, and I see the journey with the center is really interesting, and many years. So if I ask you what is your contribution to the center, can you please tell us?
Oh yeah. So I first, my main contribution was this book, which is the capstone of the Cities in Context project, which involved a fair amount of research with some KTH students, your successors, I think, in the, were you in the Sustainable Urbanism program in architecture and planning?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I worked with some of your successors, a few years later, who contributed remarkably to the book. And then basically what I would do when I was in Stockholm is I'd work on the book, and I would do some teaching, and I would oftentimes it dovetailed with research that that was done for the book, such as going up to Kiruna to understand how the town is being moved, which is in the new book. But before that, and this was Tigran being so supportive, we redid Urbanism Without Effort and worked it into the Cities in Context project. So essentially it was a research project, 1.5 books, working with students, doing some teaching, and then as part of the project, doing a Delphi panel where we brought in 4 experts from the United States and the UK and whatnot, and who also, given their backgrounds, doubled as India and and European in many ways. And so yeah, it's been a very rich opportunity. It's not entirely over. I'm continuing to do work to wind this all up over and above the book.
Yeah, and I see so many activities in this period. It's not only like teaching or writing a book, like doing so many different activities. How did you have time with that?
Oh, I think some of it is probably looks more than it is, but I think probably seriously the reason I've had more time is, here in the United Kingdom, the lockdowns have been somewhat limiting, in terms of activities, and we're of course in one right now. But I think that pulling back from my law practice opened the door to extending my energies in different directions. And I managed to do them in a way that was um, related to the work I was doing at KTH. In other words, writing articles for Planet Edison in the United States, always touched on these topics. And going back to 2017 and 18, speaking opportunities in Portugal, and then Australia, as I mentioned. But the Australian stuff turned into a Fulbright, which I qualified for, and we was actually spent 5 weeks in far north Queensland, in Cairns and Townsville, to test out some ideas from Seeing the Better City, my second book. But all of this is related. It may look like it's a lot of activities, but I've written about that in articles, and then it made its way to the third book. So all of this helped create. Yeah.
So can you tell me briefly about your two first books, like Urbanism Without Effort and also Seeing the Better City, before we start into the third? So can you share with us?
It's very kind of you to ask, and a lot of it has to do with the support of the center, because what was clear, things never turn out the way you would like them to in a rational progression. And so urbanism, and this is how what could have been one book became three. But back in 2013, I was already, as I said, very passionate about a very immersive view of the city, and not just saying, again, although I'm very supportive of these movements, not just using the word placemaking without thinking about what it really means contextually, or same for tactical urbanism, or some of the more modern quick fixes that have become very popular because they are just that. They're quick fixes. They can happen quickly. They have a sense of justice and community involvement about them. Don't get me wrong. It's part of what I talk about as well. But I have always been one who says, wait a minute, to really ensure the success of those movements or techniques or tools, we need to really understand the place we're working first. And so urbanism without effort was the idea was to go back to first principles. And what critics of that book have said was maybe a bit simplistic, without acknowledging that that's exactly what I was trying to do. I think have pointed out is, well, this is very basic stuff. You can read it in 3 hours, and it doesn't have solutions. Well, guess what? That's what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be a primer on the fundamental relationships between people and cities. Okay, so it's a short book. It was originally ebook only, designed to be read in a short period of time, because that was kind of a fad for publishers at that time. That was also supposed to be a print book, but the publisher and I discussed how can you sell an affordable ebook that was $4 as a hardbound book, right? I mean, who's going to buy that if you can, and it's like, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
And we agreed that I would do a second book that was perhaps much more of a deeper dive. And so 2 years later, I started with Seeing the Better City. Now, Seeing the Better City, because it has a photo of Paris in the front, people thought at first it might be a heritage book about taking pretty pictures of elitist places. Again, no. It was about how do we help people see those fundamental relationships that I talked about in the first book. And one of the premises of that book was that, because by that time people were taking Instagram photos everywhere, Instagram, Flickr, other visually based, app-based, media-based tools were being used by that time as inputs to decision-making processes. But I really wanted to amp that up and parrot the words of others, such as the landscape architect Anne Spurren, and say, look, never have we taken so many photos of where we live and put them to so little use. So not only is Seeing the Better City a sort of how to photograph your city, but it's also, here's some apps that are making use of this, here's some techniques, here's a bit of a history of visual ethnographies, here's all sorts of things that tell us things aren't always as we see them. And show me what you mean. And at that time, still practicing law, I actually, in a very practical chapter, suggested some ways that our land use regulatory processes could be amended to involve citizen input of citizen and other input of photography without, in a way that was, especially in the United States, supported by rules of evidence, and it wasn't just, manipulated, oh my God, this building's so tall, stuff. And so that was the practical book about how to see cities, how to understand them. And it did very well from a journal review standpoint and from a presentation opportunity. But what I learned from that book, and I think what the publisher learned, is you don't do a $30 book and put out a bunch of excerpts from it and expect people are going to buy a book as a means to do these little things that you're talking about. So book one, book two. And as I was presenting book two, I was reminded of the issues of our times. And this is when the world really opened up. It's not that I didn't intellectually know this before, but I think I began to know it in the totality of ways. Chuck, not everyone can see. And I'd say, well, but I do talk about this as being, it's not just photography, it's this, and it can be audio and it can be sketching and so on and so forth. But it's like, good point. And in Australia, well, the indigenous community to the north is very skilled in the use of cell phones, but that may be the only technology they have. And how is it that this really is going to be of use to them? And I was able to say, exactly, that's my very point. We need to be more mindful of context and circumstance. And then in Portugal, when I was on a speaking tour under the aegis of some smart city people, I was paired with technology folks from cell phone providers and other things trying to sell smart city, whatever that means, technology to interior, towns in Portugal who were losing their youth to Porto and Lisbon and were worried far more about jobs and so on and so forth. And, we did a panel in one town, and a guy who was on the city staff, he got up and said, how dare you try and sell us this stuff when my village, he lived on the edge of town, doesn't even have cell phone service yet. How dare you talk about 5G when we don't have any service at all? And you, from America, how dare you assume that what you talk about applies here? Now, he was being provocative because I had not made that. That presumption. But I turned to the technology guys when it was my turn to answer, and I I think I shocked the guy in the audience because I agreed with him absolutely. And I said, you are absolutely right. And I looked at these other guys and said, you ought to be ashamed of yourselves. You're acting like the best American capitalist. This is Portugal. This is, the embedded history here of the, this is, phenomenal. And, we must be mindful of this as we, are shameless vendors to this type of thing. Now, I again, patting myself on the head, I had already sort of said that because I was, that informed the following of an article and I know this is a bit of a favorite topic for you, and so I'm stretching out the story. That enabled an article when I was already at the center, because I went back to Stockholm in December of 2017, and I wrote an article called "Forget Smart, We Need Context Cities."
Mm-hmm.
And that became this project. And so those are the first two books. And now I guess you want to talk about them.
Yeah, of course. I would love to hear how the journey continued. Then started with the third book, Sustaining a City's Culture and Character. So
right. Okay. Well, that grew from the Context Cities project at the center, as I told you about. And it's co-authored with Tigran. Tigran will readily admit he was the enabler. He was an idea guy, but I must say the writing is mostly mine. Although there's some great research that Tigran and some of his students did about human behavior as it's influenced by urban form. And I'm Tigran will not mind my saying all of this, or I wouldn't have said it. But when we were battering around ideas for the book, we talked about, well, maybe we can be good social scientists and come up with something like a context index and argue that the most successful cities, the highest ranked cities on in Mercer and Monocle and the Economist city rankings would be ones that were true to their who they are, and so on and so forth. And that's an idea that I threw out after a while, because this book really examines, again, it is not a heritage book. Sustaining a City's Culture and Character actually says that in some place, it's a very multivariate, to use an academic term, approach to how we understand cities holistically, and how, what are the ways we can ascertain how cities are different from one another. It goes beyond the physical of seeing the better city. It brings in the issues of the day, even nominal amount of COVID, because I finished it in the first, I finished it in late spring 2020. And it honors some things like this. And this is a segment that is out there already in some extracts and in the brochure, in the publisher's brochure, where they excerpt the introduction. But before COVID, I wrote, imagine if the city around you disappeared and all the paths with which you're familiar vanished. How would you reinvent the city as you see it today? If you're a citizen of Rome or Athens, you're not going to reinvent the ancient world. You're not going to, in Dublin, you're not going to, reinvent the Dublin of James Joyce. And that's the opening inspiration. And that was before COVID. And it strikes me that that's exactly what's happened to us. And that's the bridge to where we are today. But the book goes on to look at different ways of understanding how cities are different, how they are the same, contrasting the local and the global, the old and the new, the just and the elite, the command and control versus the citizen informed versus the co-creation in the middle. It's a book about listening to people, or you shall fail. It's about, again, this notion that I've already expanded upon a couple of times, that smart city, placemaking, tactical urbanism, all of the labeled missionary techniques have been very, very appropriate in being sure that spaces are democratically available, that the decisions are informed by the people. But every place is different, and we need to start with a deeper dive, more critical thinking, and with an interdisciplinary approach. The book is purposely a mixture of art, science, both personal story, the voice of a historian, the voice of a social scientist, the voice of a lawyer, and 5 or 6 case studies that show the importance of context, all the way from a high-end project, which is the Bloomberg European headquarters in London, which, come on, it's Bloomberg, but on the other hand, it honored its context in some very important ways. It honored its location in some very important ways. Another case study is Corona, as I mentioned. Another case study is something that I ran into when, thanks to Luisa Bravo in Bologna, who's had something to do with the center over time. She was kind enough to invite some of us to speak at an event at the Architecture Biennale in Venice in 2019. And I met the curators of the Irish Pavilion, who were a group of extremely talented young Irish architects helping, I think it's 6 former market towns in Ireland realize their past in a way that would not gentrify, but give a deeper sense of the place and perhaps return some of the underpinnings of the place. And then finally, dear to your heart in Stockholm, why did the Apple store in Kungsträdgården fail so miserably? And similarly, why did the Apple store in Melbourne fail? And those are examples of what not to do. So it's a very rich book. It's I fear that it will not have the impact it could, because it's a hardback. It's not one of those $140 dollar, £120, 50,000, whatever. Do I have my decimals right? SEK, Corona. It's not one of those books, but it is not. It's not a $10 paperback, and I wish it was, because I'm very conscious that it will be seen as something that is, a bit pointy-headed and academic, when in fact, I think it involves most of the issues that are very important to how we, revision cities today.
Yeah, and who is the target group, the readers? Because you mentioned like the topics are broad within.
Yeah. Well, this publisher. Thanks for asking. It's a multiple group of readers who, as my books have been, I've found. Anybody who really likes cities, who has your passion, but isn't an urban planner like you. It's for the Mustafas of the world who like to collect books about cities and talk about cities. It's also clearly a book for education. Rubin and Littlefield, I believe, intends to, and this was the appeal to them, and one of the reasons that they were a very appealing publisher. They own a lot of imprints in the United States, like Lexington Books and so on and so forth, and imprints you've heard of. And what they are able to do is cross-market the book as a textbook. I could see it being a high school textbook, not just a university book, but a high school textbook, as well. It's got 160 graphics in it, mostly my photographs, just like
Wow.
Seeing a Better City. But also, there's a couple of diagrams from our colleague, one from our colleague Michael Mahaffey at the center about structuralism and whatnot. But several paintings by a talented artist of place and the environment in Paris named Cadine Navarro, who's become a very dear friend of mine, and I was highly influenced by her perspective on the city. And so it's also it could be a coffee table book for those people who have that, you know, that tendency. It's also designed particularly for politicians and change makers who are trying to figure out how to work together in a co-created way to realize places that will be successful because they honor local context. I want to be clear that the term, the culture and character, again, it's not a heritage book. It's got a pretty picture of a Scottish, you know, a city on its cover. But if you look carefully at that photo, there's regeneration projects underway. There's you know, two men who are sitting in the photo clearly aren't originally from Scotland, which is a good thing. And I'm very subtle, too subtle with my messaging, but this book also takes apart the notion of authenticity, culture, and character, and says very bluntly, those are just words, and do not stop there. Do not stop at what is an authentic place. That means nothing. It all depends who's looking. Culture can mean this, it can mean that. Character can mean this, it can mean that. And it's not just physical. It's not just architecture. So the book is for generalists. It's for academicians at a varying level of cities, and for operatives, practitioners within cities, and for even politicians who are out there at, you know, on virtual Zoom conferences talking about how to revision urban planning in the post-COVID world. It's all in there for them.
Yeah. I think this is good that you're targeting many groups within our society. So tell me, I think many people are listening now and interested to buy the book. So when is the release date and how can they buy it?
Oh, that's very kind of you. So the release date. I've been waiting forever. The problem with writing a book, even in the best of times, is you write a book and it usually you say something, blah, 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 blah. Charles R. Wolfe, Stockholm, Sweden, you know, whenever. Well, this was Charles R. Wolfe because he couldn't be in Stockholm, Sweden, in Richmond, London, United Kingdom, April 20th, 2020. Now, the book will be out finally. And in all fairness, we were all so disrupted. The publisher had to close for, you know, they just decided they were going to shut down because they're in New York and Washington, D.C., and so on and so forth. So, you know, kudos to Raman and Littlefield. What could have been an April 2021 release is now virtually, and I'm elated, really, even though I'm making fun of what's happened to us all. So the book should be available. It went to press, as I understand it, at the end of the year. It should be physically available in the United States any day now. That's a kind of as often happens, that's an early release. The official release is February 22nd, and you can get it pretty much everywhere. And you know, if you look, and I've, you know, because I don't have anything better to do, I sometimes get online and check out bookstores in key countries and so on and so forth. And any prominent bookstore or independent bookstore, most independent bookstores in name your city can order it. In Sweden, the standard Bolkas and what's the other one in Sweden?
Akademisk bokhandel eller
Adlibris,
Adlibris,
and,
yeah.
Yeah, it's all Amazon around the world, and all the Amazons have it. If people do want to get an early look, they can. There's a link. There's a landing page that at least I lead people to in the things I've written. I don't have it readily available here. There's a brochure that the publisher has done, but you don't even need to see that. You can see a very broad outline of it on Amazon and the Rubin and Littlefield webpage. And what has happened is there's some substantial excerpts on Google Books and Apple Books, and look inside, at least in the American Amazon. One thing I'm elated about, I should have said earlier, is usually when you write your book on how to podcast, because you are the star of Sweden now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, but when you write a book, what happens is you put out, for the advanced praise or the comments on the cover, you put out some requests. And so we asked 11 people, thinking that 3 would respond, to get those 3 on the back cover. We got 11 responses, and
wow.
People have said very nice things about the book, and they come from a variety of practical and academic backgrounds, and actually down to the level of, and I don't mean down in any negative sense. I mean really people who are working in the trenches as placemakers. So we have some very nice reviews from Europe and Australia and US and here in the United Kingdom and so on.
Yes, Jack, I would love to ask you about one thing. You wrote many books and you're teaching in universities. So what makes a successful place work? Can you give us some key elements?
Well, I've already said that I'm no fan of labels that are just trendy. And I think a successful place finds a way, as is the trend these days. This is a very good trend, to listen to the community, local voices, and provide a multiplicity of inputs, be they oral, media-based, sitting down over coffee when that is possible again. Certainly this medium, I think we've learned a lot about the value of digital connectivity. COVID has accelerated many good trends that needed to happen anyway, as we know. A successful city finds a way to balance listening and decision making and implementation, and reflect it in people's level of satisfaction with where they live. And that doesn't mean just a aesthetically pleasing place. It doesn't necessarily mean a classic equal access to a public space. It factors in issues of safety, equal access, multicultural reflection, a real snapshot of what the place is. We can't freeze time, but within the time frame within the planning horizon, as you would say, as a practicing planner. Is that, you're asking how does a successful place work? I will say that one thing I've learned from this writing and from practicing law and from looking around an awful lot as I do is that in determining the appropriate global local mix or virtual or physical mix or top down or bottom up mix, we all are, as humans, and this goes back to urbanism without effort, we all are facing the same issues, more or less. It's just how they reflect themselves in the context of different places. And so if I didn't say it in the last monologue here, you really have to understand how these generic issues are landing in your community or in the community of your clients or the community of your constituents. I learn the most not from most experts or necessarily from highly educated and friends and so on and so forth. I'll tell you a quick story. When I was first here, after about a year, we were in a flat in London that was it needed a lot of work when we first moved in, and I asked a very nice gentleman who was brought in by the property manager to fix some things. I asked if he wouldn't mind coming over for an hour or two on the weekend and fixing some things that the landlord wasn't going to pay for. And he was a really, really nice guy, happened to be from Bulgaria. And I write about him twice in the new book. Plamen the handyman, who is my hero, because Plamen the handyman asked me, and I don't mean this in a patronizing way. This really happened, and it really taught me the value of diversity and so on and so forth in a city such as London. He said, because he, obviously he knew we were American, and that I think I told him I'd been there about a year at the time. He said, "Well, what do you think? Do you like it here?" And I said, "Yeah, no, I like it here. I've had the good fortune of living a lot of places, and started talking about a few things." And I said, "Where are you from?" And he said, "Oh, I'm from Bulgaria." And I said, "Do you like it here?" And he said, "Oh, well, yeah, I do, but every place is kind of the same. But the way, we go to school, we work, we eat, we sleep, we live in a flat or a house, but in different places, different of these things are better. So it's places are the same, except different things are better or worse in different places." And I looked at him, and for anybody who's not totally bored at this point and is watching this on YouTube, I looked at him with kind of like this, and I said, "Oh my God, could you repeat that?"
That was really deep.
It was very deep, even though it wasn't deep at all, and that's the whole point. I mean, sometimes we take ourselves far too seriously, and we need not go to a labeled movement to come up with very fundamental issues of human nature. And we don't need to call them authentic. I'm glad you said that was deep and not authentic.
Well, I'm really happy that you shared the stories of your story, your 3 book story, and also there's a story that I want to hear about. I see you doing interesting things on Instagram and YouTube. Place parts. Tell me, what are you doing? Tell the listeners.
Place parts? Oh, place parts. Okay, place parts. Well, inspired by people like you, I thought so we're here in our 3rd lockdown in the United Kingdom, and although it's, you can still go to the grocery store and you can still go out for walks, and you're supposed to stay home if you're obeying the rules. And with this insufferable wait for the book, it's like, this is crazy. I can't keep writing articles about the book or even writing articles about anything, because in these profound times, anything I think of, somebody else has already said, or, it's just, it's not happening anymore. And I can't go to Sweden. I can't do what I was doing before. Like so many of us, we have had to readjust who we are, and so on and so forth. So I thought, should I do a podcast on themes related to the book, for instance? And then I saw, well, no, Mustafa and many others are already doing this. I'm not going to add anything to the topics of the day in that way. So what what about a YouTube channel, I thought, or Instagram TV? And I thought, that's more my thing. It would be fun because I like to photograph and so on and so forth. So what I'm doing, and thank you for asking, is I'm doing a series of quite short videos, which I then put on Instagram on my IGTV channel, and I put on YouTube and my YouTube channel, and then I do a little short article about them in my Sustaining Place, one of my newer blog, and I do what you do, tweet it around and so on and so forth. But the idea is, I want to be more like Plowman, and I want to take these lofty ideas that are maybe in my mind too much locked in an expensive book that not everyone will see. Again, maybe I'm making that up. I don't know, but I want to make sure those ideas get around, not so people go buy the book, but because I care about the 2 or 3 years I spent developing these ideas. And so, as I think you've seen, I've been kind of funny with them in that I've taken myself and superimposed myself over photos of the same place 100 years ago and say, place is complicated because I'm at the same place in a different time, aren't I? And then tomorrow I'm going to have an old friend of mine from American high school who actually has become quite a famous television actor named Richard Karn, and was co-star in the American TV comedy Home Improvement, and has a new show with his sidekick Tim Allen. The thing about those guys, though, is they're all about home and fixing and reinventing and regenerating. And the character he played on TV was about tools, and he actually has become identified with his character in commercials and so on and so forth. And so, as I told him, and as I told you when we were getting ready to start, I've often thought about him as someone who, the character he played, his name was Al Borland. It's like, we need Al Borland up there demonstrating this placemaking tool. Well, guess what? So tomorrow I've got, I'll have about maybe a longer version than I usually will do, maybe 15 minutes, because it's two guys who were in the same high school class talking about his new TV show, which premieres on February 14th, I think, and then our book, which comes out on the 22nd. So it's two guys talking about what they're working on. But seriously, what I'm trying to do there is not I really want to take these ideas and get them to be even more popular than some of the short-term references that they might already have. That's what Place Parts is about. Yeah.
I really like it, and I would love that you keep doing it because it's really interesting, and I love the way you're doing it. It's fun, a lot of fun.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, no, I've got the energy for the moment. I mean, I don't. And you know what I'm trying to do? You probably appreciate this. It's very easy when you do these things to, at least for me, I readily turn into a perfectionist. It's like, oh no, the volume's wrong. Oh, no, I've got to do this over, and I'm trying to stop myself from too much of that. As long as people can hear it and
Yeah.
see it,
Yeah,
that's fine.
Exactly, to start with, and then like it's a journey.
Yeah,
You learn, and then you develop, and so on, like how I did with the podcast. In the beginning,
yeah.
people even like was not listening because of the sound quality and so on. But anyway, I'm so happy that we did this conversation, and thank you so much again for giving your time to record the podcast. And now I would love that we finish this episode by you giving us, the listeners, 3 takeaway messages.
Okay. 3 takeaway messages, and I knew you were going to ask this, and I purposefully did not think about it very much because I wanted to be spontaneous about it. One is something that's very motivational, I think, for people, especially in these times. Be careful what you wish for, because I remember when I left Seattle, I was told, to my shock, that people looked at me as someone who could be retiring, and they said, "Oh, I can't believe that you're doing this. You're going off on great new adventure, and you've been overseas a lot, and you're moving overseas, and whereas I'm a grandfather taking my grandkids to school, and it's like, first of all, that's fine, and that's probably more fulfilling to that individual than whatever I'm doing, always struggling to figure out what comes next. But I think be careful what you wish for, because if you have these passions, it's not always just a case of means that you're blessed with, and so on and so forth. I mean, people were very inspired in the American inauguration with the young poet who spoke. I don't know if you saw that, but it's the same story. She has said that she plans to run for president in 2035. So, so watch out. So be careful what you wish for. Don't tell yourself that your passions or your interests or your hopes and dreams are silly, because they're not. Secondly, relative to issues of place, it's tough to argue for this in these times, but think about where you live and the role you can play in improving it through any means, and whether it's in these times helping someone go get their vaccination, or getting food for them because they need to stay, in shelter in place, or in the times that we'll eventually get back to, getting involved in local community groups and so on and so forth. Can't emphasize that enough, because people have written about this in terms of actions you can take, a single individual can take to help control climate change. But these kinds of things are going to get, very, very, very important, because everybody is, one thing COVID has taught us is that everybody has a role to play, and that there are unfortunately some selfish people out there that are inadvertently leading to people's deaths, and so stay involved, stay aware, and try and make a difference. And then thirdly, think for yourself. It goes back to the immersion and the deep dive, points of view that I mentioned at the beginning. There's absolutely nothing wrong with a labeled movement, or admiring a great thinker, because they are great thinkers. But often those are only organizations and people who open the door to political acceptance. And they are, in their own way, I'm sure many of them, be it Jan Gale, Richard Florida. I think you've had Jan Gale on your podcast, have you not?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, Yeah, I mean, they will tell you that, it's their own story, and to some degree, they are elated that they're opening the door um, for other people. It's important to repeat what they say. It's important to retweet if you agree, but that's not enough. And to really understand where you live, this goes back to many of the things I've said throughout this nice chat, that, um, you know, think critically, think for yourself, and it's very important, because I think it leads to that other sense of creativity and fulfillment that you know that people should have. Everybody matters. It's trite. It's just like you said earlier. It's deep. It's not authentic to say that, because we're going to throw out that word. But it's important. So anyway.
Yeah, I thank you so much for the messages, and I think this is a very important point, that we should really think beyond the words that we read or listen to, like really critically. So this is a really good point, and I would love that you ask us as a listener one question, so we reflect about. Do you have a question for us?
I would say it's a two-part question. What many of the people who are your listeners are by nature within the bubble, and they're involved in the planning profession or the allied professions, the built environment. So I would say, what is your? It's sort of similar to what you asked me and what you ask a lot of your guests. What are you doing to make the places that you are working in or living a better place, whatever that means to you? Better for whom? Again, seeing the better city was not about pretty pictures. It was designed to make people say, better for whom? What are you doing in your work or your daily, existence to make a better place, however you define place? And that branches into two parts. What can you do now, before COVID unwinds and we're closer to home and we need to be careful about what we do and stay away from people and all those things? And then what will you do again once things are more the way they were before?
Really good question. Really good question.
Maybe, yeah. Well, maybe someone else has asked that. I don't know, but
no, actually no.
Yeah.
So thank you so much again. And before I leave you, what is the next step for you as a researcher?
Well, I know that at the center, I know one thing we're doing is we are finishing up the cities in context work, and it's quite honestly, in some conversations I've had recently with Tigran, that includes place parts. So you can, although I don't announce place parts as a product of the center, it really is a necessary part of the implementation of the project, of the Cities in Context project. Even though we have, American TV stars on it, and not pointy-headed academics yet. We will though, I don't know. In some ways, I don't know, because I think I'm through with my trilogy on what, about the relationship between people and their cities. I think through happenstance and, revising a book, 5 years later, and writing a book in the middle, and now writing this third book, which integrates both of them, that mission is complete. Whether I will try and do some teaching here in the United Kingdom, I don't yet know. Whether I will, I do have, consulting projects from time to time. Whether I will take the ideas from the book and the methodology, which we really didn't talk about, but there is a real methodology to this third book. Whether I'll try and help cities implement that, I don't know. I do think that I'm very interested in what we started talking about and have continued to talk about, and that is how to get these ideas out there in a useful way to people. And so maybe, I do a lot of photography, and I do, maybe Place Parts will become a network series somewhere, and more than IGTV. I don't know. The answer is I don't know, but I'm sure it will be interesting.
Yes. So thank you so much again, and I wish you all the good luck with all your future projects.
Yeah, you too, Mustafa. It's been a pleasure, and I'll see you in Stockholm when I get back there soon.
Hopefully. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Well, thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica podcast. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. You learned something new and also got inspired by the guest. Don't forget to share the episode on your social media and recommend it to people you think they are really interested in this topic. Thank you so much again for giving your valuable time to Urbanistica podcast. I am Mustafa Sharif. Keep up the good work. Keep loving cities.